studies. They fluoridate your water when they say it's for your teeth.
To be ingesting it. So here's the issue. We have a lot of chairs of research, you would know that through the Ministry of Health, federally and provincially. And they're researching a lot of things that there's a lot of huge gaps in the context of the journals and the reports. And some, in some cases, have been suggested, autism being one, there could be a connection with fluoridization. No evidence yet, but one thing I discovered is a huge gap in the context of research. All the research hasn't been done. So I guess we're putting the cart before the horse because we really don't know. We don't have any linkages with the current journals, but there's still a lot of ongoing studies. Would that be correct?
Councillor, there will hopefully always be ongoing studies. However, in this area, and that was why we got into the fairly major 5-year review, we wanted to know what was out there and what was conclusive and what the systematic reviews said. And as Dr. Mackey mentioned, there are about 18 systematic reviews within recent years, all strongly recommending to continue the use of water fluoridation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor McCann.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And, thanks very much for coming today. It's a difficult subject, as you can tell. We've been at it 3 or 4 times now. Just again, the comments that were in the Public Health Agency of Canada report undertaken by the University of Calgary researchers, April 2011, synthesis dated. One way I read this is that they're concerned about the anti-fluoridation information not being accurately or fully reflected in their review, because it may be gray literature, or it may not be listed in the same way as their literature search methodology captured the majority of literature they had. And you've done your own work here, or I don't know if you're referring to the same work here, or your own work at Health Canada. Is that a concern to you, that maybe missing some data, some literature out there, Mr. Mayor, through you?
Councillor, through you, Mr. Mayor, and that's a very good question. And I saw what the scientists did at Health Canada when they were doing the 5-year Health Canada review, and I saw what the provinces did. And the system of excluding poor literature is very, very carefully done. You do not want to include in a systematic review literature that doesn't hold up to the science. And there are very, very specific criteria. So I know what the Health Canada scientists did and what the expert panel did was they went through the science and they excluded science that they felt wasn't strong. In other words, often, Councillor, what you get are things called confounding variables, where you see a change where you have no idea why it happened, and you attribute it to something as opposed to possibly 4 other things that could have been involved. So you need to get rid of that type of poorly constructed, methodologically flawed science, and you look at what's basically systematically often contained in good peer-reviewed journals, and that's what we use. And I can appreciate your point, and I appreciate the concern that the researchers from Calgary had, because there is some science or pseudoscience that needs to be excluded if it isn't done properly, and it does get excluded.
Mr. Mayor, I haven't, of course, won't have a chance to go through all the different literature, but with the 2 provinces, Quebec and BC, having very little fluoridation, and understanding there are lots of confounding factors. They may be getting applications at school, or who knows how often they brush their teeth, that sort of thing in terms of fluoride, or what their diet's like. We think of maple sugar or maple syrup in Quebec, for example. But have there been those kinds of, and I'm not a scientist, so is it double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled clinical trials? Is that the language I'm looking for? Those kinds of studies that you're able to plan for the confounding factors and have them in there, yet you've got BC and Quebec versus Ontario, for example, where the majority of communities do have fluoridation, to see if it makes a difference for the different age groups. You know, the children, I guess, is one cohort versus the adults is another cohort, whether it makes a difference to have fluoridation in the water. Mr. Mayor, through you.
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, that's a very good point, and obviously it was easier to do studies right at the beginning when this was coming in, because you didn't have the confounding variables. And the more fluoride that became available, then the more confounders you got. What I can tell you is that the province of BC has picked up on your exact issue and wants to do their own survey to compare their epidemiological results to the national survey because of this 30 to 40% differential. I can also tell you in Quebec, when they looked at the national results compared to their own, they found a 30% differential in kids, that they were 30% higher. Since then, Dorval, which had ceased fluoridation, has now started to fluoridate again. And recently, Montreal and Trois-Rivières in Quebec have both agreed to go back in with water fluoridation because they're very concerned. So, Councillor, a good question. Easier early on to do very, very clean clinical trials when you don't have other sources of fluoride. More difficult now, but they're often done by epidemiological studies and by reviewing large numbers of people.
Last question, Mr. Mayor. We had a little bit of an interchange there on the motion that I was going to bring forward today, which will be a notice of motion. We'll deal with it at a future meeting. But as I understand it, the region of Peel had the same discussion, I guess, we're having today a short time ago. And their focus is to try and obtain additional information. In fact, it says they're trying to reassure the citizens of Peel that the use of fluorosilicates added to drinking water for the purpose of treating dental decay is safe and what the health effects are, and they're asking for additional work to be done by Health Canada. I guess, I don't know if you've seen this motion from Peel, or the letter from Peel. I imagine is how it would have come out to you, at Health Canada. If you haven't seen it, fair enough, and talk about it some future point, but have you seen what Peel has asked for, and do you have any comments at this point in time, Mr. Mayor, through you?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Councillor, I'm not sure what you have today, but I have seen one that came in from Peel, and it was the whole issue in relation to considering whether fluoride is a drug or not. And that was the issue. And I know the Minister has just responded to that, and that's a good question. And in a nutshell, Councillor, the Food and Drugs Act does not consider fluoride in water as a drug, just the same as adding any additive to, say, vitamin D to milk. You wouldn't consider vitamin D or milk as a drug. The fluoride in water is considered as a beneficial element. It's a mineral, the same as chlorine is a mineral. And there are a number of minerals. When you add to water, Councillor, in a water plant, there are up to 40 different chemicals added, and I would leave this to water specialists, but I know there are up to 40 different components added. They'll add, for example, if it's alkaline in an organism, they'll add hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid to bring the pH closer to 7. They will add fluoride, they will add chlorine, they will add fluxes to clean the water. So there are up to 40 different components added, and certainly none of those components would be really considered as a drug. So that's the kind of thrust of the response. And that's a public response, and if you're interested, I can send maybe to you or your mayor the response that the Minister had given to Peel very, very recently, if that helps you.
Yeah, certainly would appreciate that. Thanks.
So we all brought it up without asking the right fucking questions, but life is a lesson we learn, don't you know?
Greatest trick the devil ever pulled, was convincing the world he didn't exist, The greatest trick the devil ever pulled, was convincing the world he didn't exist.